Welcome to the channel Stories Around the Campfire. This is a place to slow down, listen to stories, and rest from the noise of the day. If this kind of atmosphere speaks to you, subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Outside, winter had already settled in for the night. Not the kind of winter that bites at once, but the quiet, steady kind, the one that stands still and lets the cold slowly sink in. The snow didn't crunch loudly underfoot. It answered each step softly, as if reminding anyone who walked there that the day was over and nothing needed to be rushed anymore. The house stood a little away from the road, not hidden, not lonely, just where it had always been. The windows glowed with a warm yellow light, not bright, not inviting attention. It was the kind of light that doesn't call out to strangers because it knows that everyone who belongs here is already close. Someone stopped by the door for a moment, not because they hesitated to go inside, but because warmth always asks for a pause, a single breath, a chance to leave the cold, the road, and the long day outside where they belong. The door opened quietly. Warm air wrapped around the body at once, heavy, familiar like an old blanket. It smelled of firewood, faint smoke, and bread. That smell had no real name. It simply meant one thing: this place was alive. One person stepped in first, another followed. No one hurried. Coats were loosened slowly, boots set aside carefully. Movements were practiced, unspoken, learned over many winters. Here, nobody needed instructions. The body remembered what to do. The door closed, this time for the last time that evening. Inside, the room was neither crowded nor empty. It was exactly as full as it needed to be. The hearth burned steadily, without sparks, without noise. The fire didn't demand attention, it simply existed. Its light softened the walls, rounded the corners, made shadows kinder. A coat was hung on a wooden peg by the door, heavy, dark, still holding a bit of the cold. Another pair of boots was placed nearby, turned inward as if they too were ready to rest. With every small movement, the outside world loosened its grip. No one spoke right away, and no one felt the need to. The silence wasn't heavy, it was natural, like the pause between breathing in and breathing out. The fire sighed quietly as the logs settled, as if making itself comfortable for the long night ahead. Outside, the darkness deepened. Snow reflected the moon faintly, but the night itself stopped at the walls of the house. It did not come inside. Inside, there was only calm. Someone stepped closer to the hearth, stretching out their hands. Not too close, just enough to feel the heat reach the skin. Someone else sat down on a bench, leaning back against the wall, finally allowing their body to rest for real, not just in appearance. This was the moment when it became clear the evening had begun. Not by the clock, not by words, but by feeling. There were no important people and no minor ones here. Everyone who sat in the room belonged exactly where they were, not because it had been planned, but because this evening could not have happened any other way. The fire burned quietly. The house breathed evenly. And winter outside did its work without interfering. It no longer mattered who arrived first or last. What mattered was simple. Everyone was here, and for now, that was enough. The evening stretched ahead, wide, slow, unhurried, and it had nowhere else to go.
The hearth did not blaze. It never did. The fire burned low and steady, as if it had learned long ago that there was no need to rush. thick logs lay close to one another, darkened by time and heat, their edges glowing softly from within. The flame moved slowly, almost thoughtfully, rising and falling like a calm breath. Someone stepped closer and added another log, not carelessly, not to make the fire stronger, only to keep it company. The wood settled with a quiet sound, and the fire accepted it without protest. No sparks jumped, no crackle demanded attention. The hearth simply continued, unchanged in its nature. In that room, the fire was not the center because it demanded it. It was the center because everything else naturally gathered around it. The light it cast was warm and uneven. It touched the walls gently, softened the rough wood, made old marks and scratches look less like damage and more like memory. Shadows leaned into corners, not hiding anything, just resting there. The warmth spread slowly, first near the hearth, then farther toward the benches and the walls. Even the far corners of the room lost their sharp chill. People chose their places without speaking. One sat closer to the fire, another leaned back where the heat arrived more gently. No one moved anyone else aside. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they belonged. A hand reached toward the flame, turning palm and fingers slowly, feeling the heat sink in. Someone else pulled their coat tighter around their shoulders, not from cold, but from habit. The body takes time to believe it is safe. The room carried a deep, familiar scent. Firewood, old timber, something faintly baked, something dry and comforting. The kind of smell that does not fade quickly because it has soaked into the walls over many years. Outside, the wind stirred for a moment, brushing against the house. The walls answered with silence. Inside, the hearth held steady, as if it had seen far worse nights and had no reason to be concerned now. No one watched the fire closely. They glanced at it, returned to it, trusted it. The hearth had this quiet authority, the kind that comes not from power, but from reliability. It did not promise warmth, it simply gave it, steadily, patiently, without asking anything in return. Time behaved differently here. Minutes did not line up, hours did not announce themselves. The fire marked the passing of the evening better than any measure ever could. When the flame leaned lower, the night deepened. When the logs settled inward, the room followed. Someone shifted on the bench. Wood creaked softly under weight, an old sound that belonged to the house itself. Another person exhaled slowly, a long breath that carried the last of the road out of their chest. No one spoke yet, and still the room felt full. The hearth continued to glow, its heart steady and red. It did not hurry the evening forward. It allowed it to unfold exactly as it wished. Winter could wait outside. Here, the fire had time.
By the time the warmth had truly settled in, coats were already hanging by the door. Heavy, dark, shaped by many winters. They clung to the wooden pegs like tired travelers, slowly releasing the cold they had carried inside. Dampness faded from them bit by bit, leaving behind only the smell of wool and frost. Boots stood nearby, turned inward, close to the hearth. Their leather had softened over years of use, creased in the same places again and again. No one kicked them aside carelessly. They were set down with the quiet respect given to things that had carried a person safely home. People began to move differently. Shoulders lowered, breaths grew longer. The stiffness of the road eased from backs and legs. Someone stretched, hands raised slowly above their head, then let them fall again with a quiet sigh. Another leaned back against the wall, feeling the steady warmth seep through layers of clothing and into bone. There was no rush to speak. Here, silence did not need explanation. The first words arrived softly,
not as a conversation, but as a continuation of the quiet. Someone mentioned the frost on the path outside, how it had made the earth firm beneath the snow. Another answered with a simple sound of agreement. No one tried to make the words important. They were only there to show presence. A faint chuckle rose when someone recalled how the gate had nearly refused to open earlier, frozen in place like a stubborn mule. "It always knows when you're in a hurry," someone said. Another replied, "That's why you shouldn't hurry." The smile that followed passed from one face to another. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to warm the room further. The hearth responded with a soft settling of wood. A log shifted inward, releasing a dull, comforting sound. The fire did not flare, it simply adjusted, as if listening. Hands moved without thought. A cup was lifted, turned slowly, then set back down. Fingers traced the rim of a wooden bowl, following grooves worn smooth by countless evenings just like this one. The house held these movements easily. It had seen them all before. A bench creaked gently as someone changed position. No one glanced over. The sound belonged here, just like the breath of the fire and the low murmur of voices that came and went. One of the group remained quiet longer than the rest, but their silence did not stand apart. It rested alongside the others, accepted and unremarkable. In a place like this, speaking was not required to belong. As minutes passed, faces softened. Lines that looked stern in daylight eased under the fire's glow. Eyes grew warmer, steadier. The room did not make people different. It allowed them to be what they already were. The outside world slipped further away. The road, the cold, the long stretch of winter darkness, all of it remained beyond the door, exactly where it should. Here, coats stayed on their pegs, and worries, without anyone noticing, were laid down on the floor beside them. For a while, the talk stayed light. It drifted the way smoke does, rising, thinning, then returning again. No one set out to tell a story. They only spoke because the fire was warm and the evening felt wide enough to hold words. It began with something small. Old Mikhailo, who sat closest to the hearth, shifted on the bench and muttered that the winter had come earlier this year. He said it as a fact, not a complaint, the kind of statement that invites agreement rather than argument. Someone answered that winter never really comes early. It only arrives when people finally notice it. That earned a quiet laugh. Mikhailo snorted softly and shook his head. "Spoken like someone who doesn't have to fix fences after frost," he said. That drew a fuller chuckle from the room. Another voice joined in, remembering a year when the snow fell so suddenly that half the village woke to doors frozen shut. Someone joked that it was the only morning when no one was late for anything, because no one could leave at all. The fire shifted again, as if approving. These were not stories yet. They were pieces, fragments of memory, laid gently between people like kindling. Then Hannah spoke. She had been quiet until then, sitting near the wall where the firelight barely reached. Her voice was calm, unhurried, the kind that never raises itself. When she spoke, others naturally leaned in, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to hear. She mentioned a winter evening long ago when she had walked home after dusk and found the road strangely empty. Not frightening, just quiet in a way that felt deliberate. She described how the snow muffled every sound, how even her own steps seemed unsure whether to be heard. Someone asked where this was going. She smiled and said she didn't know yet. That earned another laugh. But she continued anyway. She told how she had stopped near the old well not because she needed water, but because something about the night had asked her to pause, and how, while standing there, she realized that for the first time all day she was not thinking about what needed to be done next. That, she said simply, was when I knew the day was over. No lesson followed, no conclusion was offered. The room accepted the story as it was. Another person added something of their own, a memory of getting lost near the river as a child and feeling more curious than afraid. Someone else recalled how their grandmother used to say that winter nights stretch longer when people stop fighting them. The stories came one by one now. None of them were dramatic, none demanded attention, but together they changed the shape of the evening. People leaned closer without realizing it. The benches seemed to draw in. The room felt smaller, warmer, as if the house itself had decided to listen. The fire remained steady, throwing gentle light across faces that no longer looked toward the door. No one was thinking of leaving now. The stories had done their quiet work. The evening had found its voice.
It was Petro who finally spoke. Not because someone asked him to, not because the silence demanded it. He simply cleared his throat, shifted closer to the hearth, and said quietly, "You know, I once ended up in a house like this by mistake." A few heads turned. Someone smiled already, sensing where this might go. Petro was not a man who exaggerated. When he spoke, he chose his words carefully, as if each one needed a reason to be there. He rested his elbows on his knees, warming his hands, and looked into the fire, not at the people, at least not at first. "It was winter," he began, "and I had no business being out that late." That earned a soft chuckle. He explained that he had planned a simple errand, nothing worth remembering. Walk there, pick something up, return before dark. The kind of plan winter often pretends to respect. But the snow came heavier than expected. Not a storm, just enough to blur the path. The road he knew well began to look unfamiliar, as if it had quietly shifted while he wasn't paying attention. "I thought I was still close," Petro said. "Turns out, winter has a different idea of distance." Someone nodded. Everyone there understood that. He told how he noticed a light through the trees, faint, steady, unmoving, not a signal, not an invitation, just a fact, and how he stood there for a moment, debating whether to knock. "I didn't want to disturb anyone," Petro said. A pause. "Which is usually how you know you should." The room smiled. Petro described the door opening slowly, the warm air spilling out, carrying the smell of firewood and something cooking long enough to forget it was cooking at all. An older woman had stood there, looking at him without surprise, as if unexpected visitors were simply part of winter's routine. "She didn't ask who I was," Petro said. "She asked whether I had eaten." Laughter moved through the room, gentle, approving. Inside, the house had been much like this one. Low ceiling, wooden table scarred by years of use, a bench that creaked but held firm, the fire burning without urgency. He had been offered a place to sit, a bowl of something warm, bread broken without ceremony. "I kept thinking I should explain myself," Petro said, "but no one seemed to need an explanation." He stayed longer than he planned, then longer still. Talk drifted in and out. Stories surfaced, faded, returned. At some point, he realized the snow outside no longer mattered. "When I finally left," Petro said, "I knew the road again, not because it had changed, but because I had." The room was quiet now, not expectant, settled. Someone near the wall murmured, "That's how winter teaches." Petro smiled into the fire. "I never found that house again," he added, "but I stopped looking." The hearth shifted softly, logs settling inward, and for a moment
No one spoke, because everyone recognized the story, even if they had never lived it exactly that way. The evening leaned closer to itself.
For a moment after Petro finished, no one moved. Not because they were waiting for more, but because the story had settled too deeply to disturb it right away. The fire responded first. A log shifted inward with a low, hollow sound, and a thin tongue of flame rose briefly before sinking back into the embers. The hearth seemed to accept the story the same way it accepted everything else, quietly, without judgment. Someone exhaled slowly. Another adjusted their seat on the bench, wood creaking softly beneath them. The sound felt natural, necessary, as if the house itself was acknowledging that something had passed through the room. Petro did not look up. He remained facing the fire, hands resting loosely between his knees. His shoulders had relaxed, the way they do when a memory has finally found its place. No one rushed to respond. In that silence, the house became more present. The low ceiling pressed gently downward, not in a way that confined, but in a way that held everything together. The walls, darkened by years of smoke and warmth, reflected the firelight unevenly, as if they too were remembering other evenings, other voices. The smell in the room shifted again. The firewood released a deeper, sweeter note. Something faintly herbal lingered in the air. Dried leaves or roots stored nearby, warmed just enough to remind themselves of being alive. Someone poured a drink into a small cup. The liquid moved thickly, slowly, catching the light. The cup was passed without ceremony. No one counted who had already had some. It wasn't that kind of evening. A quiet comment surfaced at last. Some houses don't belong to places. They belong to moments. No one disagreed. Another voice added, half to the fire, "That's why you don't find them twice." Petro nodded, almost imperceptibly. The story had not asked for agreement or admiration. It had simply laid itself among the others, like another log added to the hearth earlier, now glowing from within. The evening shifted. People sat differently now, leaning closer, resting elbows on knees. One person drew their coat tighter around their shoulders, not from cold, but from comfort, the way one might pull a blanket closer even when the room is warm. Outside, the night deepened. Snow continued to fall lightly, or perhaps it had stopped. No one inside knew for certain. The windows reflected the fire more than they revealed the world beyond. Someone near the door glanced at the hanging coats, then looked away again. The thought of leaving passed through the room briefly, like a draft, and then disappeared. This was not the hour for departures. The fire burned lower now, its glow richer and steadier. Shadows thickened at the edges of the room, but they did not threaten. They simply waited. The story had done something subtle. It had reminded everyone that evenings like this were not rare, only unnoticed. No one spoke for a while longer, and in that shared quiet, each person found something of their own, a remembered road, a door opened without questions, a warmth that arrived exactly when it was needed. The night outside continued its work. Inside, the evening held.
The night had fully settled by the time anyone realized it. Not because it grew darker, darkness had been there for a while, but because the house itself had changed its rhythm. The fire burned lower now, deeper, its light no longer dancing, but resting. Embers glowed steadily, like a quiet heart that knew it had nothing to prove. Someone noticed the silence had grown thicker, not heavier, fuller. The kind of silence that appears only when people stop waiting for something to happen. It was then that Ivan stood up. Not suddenly,
not with intention. He simply rose, as if the movement had been waiting for him all evening. "I didn't think we'd need this tonight," he said quietly. No one asked what he meant. Late evenings do not explain themselves. Ivan crossed the room slowly, careful not to disturb the warmth, and stopped beside the old chest near the wall. It had been there the whole time, dark wood, worn edges, iron corners dulled by years. Everyone had seen it. No one had truly noticed it. The lid creaked softly as he opened it. The sound cut gently through the room, not sharp enough to break the calm, but clear enough to draw every ear. From inside came a scent different from the fire. Old wood, linen, something dry and faintly sweet, the smell of things kept, not forgotten. Ivan reached in and took out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He unrolled it slowly, hand steady, respectful. Inside lay an old notebook, thin, faded, its edges yellowed and uneven, edges softened by time. It was not beautiful, it was real. "This belonged to my grandfather," Ivan said. "He used to write when winter made the nights too long." He did not read right away. He held the notebook for a moment, weighing it, as if checking whether this was the right evening after all. The fire accepted the pause. Finally, he opened it and began to read. The words were simple, no poetry, no lessons, just observations about snow piling against doors, about evenings spent near the hearth, about people who arrived without notice and left without ceremony. One line made someone smile, another made someone nod. Then Ivan stopped. "He wrote," Ivan said softly, "that the best evenings are the ones you don't try to keep. You just let them pass through you." No one spoke. The notebook was closed gently and wrapped again, returned to the chest as carefully as it had been taken out. The lid lowered with the same quiet creak, and the sound seemed to settle into the walls. The room felt different now, not changed, completed. Someone adjusted a log in the hearth. Another leaned back, eyes half closed. A breath was taken, deep and unhurried. Outside, the night remained exactly where it belonged. Inside, the warmth stayed. No one felt the need to add anything. The evening had spoken for itself. After the chest was closed, nothing needed to be said. The fire continued to glow, lower now, its warmth no longer spreading outward, but holding steady, gathered close to itself. The embers pulsed slowly, as if breathing, not alive in the human sense, but aware in a way only fire can be. The house responded to this change. Wood settled. Somewhere above, a beam made a faint sound, stretching as it always did when the night deepened. It was not a noise that demanded attention, only a reminder that the house, too, had a body. People sat differently now, not alert, not withdrawn, simply at ease. Someone shifted closer to the wall, resting their back fully against it, feeling the warmth seep through layers of clothing and into bone. Another drew their legs in, hands folded loosely, eyes half closed. No one announced tiredness. It arrived quietly, like snow falling without wind. The smell in the room softened again. Firewood burned down to a sweeter note, less sharp, more rounded. The faint trace of herbs lingered in the air, warmed just enough to remind themselves they were there. A cup stood forgotten on the table, its contents long since cooled, but no one felt the need to refill it. This was no longer an hour for doing, it was an hour for being. Outside, winter moved slowly. The snow reflected moonlight faintly, not bright enough to disturb the night, just enough to shape it, The road lay untouched now, smoothed over, patient. Whatever tracks had led here were already fading. Inside, the door remained closed, not locked, trusted. A small movement broke the stillness. Someone reached out and gently pulled a blanket from the back of a bench, laying it across their knees. The fabric was heavy, woven thick, smelling faintly of smoke and storage. It settled with weight, grounding the body beneath it. Another person smiled faintly, watching the fire without really seeing it. These were not the smiles of joy or laughter. They were softer, the kind that appear when nothing is required. Time no longer stretched forward. It folded inward. The night outside could continue as long as it wished. Here it had already been accepted. The hearth did not flare. The house did not shift. The people did not hurry. Everything that needed to happen had already happened. The rest could wait.
The fire was nearly still now. Not gone, simply settled into itself. The embers glowed deep red, steady and patient, holding warmth the way only something long-lived can. No flame reached upward anymore. Nothing needed to. The room followed its lead. Breathing slowed. Movements became rare, careful, almost unnecessary. Someone shifted slightly, more from comfort than intention. Another adjusted the blanket on their knees, then let their hands rest. No one watched the fire closely now. They trusted it. The house seemed to exhale. Wood no longer creaked. Walls stood quiet, warmed through and through. The ceiling pressed gently downward, not as weight, but as shelter, the way a roof should. Outside, winter continued its quiet work. Snow lay smooth and undisturbed, reflecting just enough light to keep the night from feeling endless. The road beyond the house no longer mattered. It had done its part earlier and could rest now. Inside, no one spoke of leaving, not because they couldn't, but because the moment did not ask for it yet. Someone near the hearth reached out once more, nudging a piece of wood inward, not to keep the fire alive longer, but to let it finish well. The embers answered with a soft glow, steady and calm. This was the kind of ending that does not announce itself. It does not say goodbye. It does not close doors loudly. It simply settles. People gathered their thoughts quietly, the way one gathers belongings after a long, good visit, not eager, not reluctant, just aware that something had been shared. One by one, coats would soon be lifted from their pegs. Boots would be pulled on. The door would open and cold air would rush in briefly, sharp and honest. But not yet. For now, the warmth still held. The evening had given everything it needed to give. Not stories to remember word for word, not lessons to repeat, but a feeling that would return later, without warning, on another winter night. The fire dimmed further. The house remained. And somewhere between the embers and the quiet, the evening stayed, complete, unhurried, and enough.
Thank you for spending this evening with us. If this story left you feeling warm, support the video with a like and share a few words in the comments. Subscribe to the channel to return to stories around the campfire.